Hello, my name is Harikrishnan Premprakash. I'm finally a master's student of architecture at Oxford Brookes University. We welcome you to the 19th Oxford Human Rights Festival event, Caste in India, Past, Present, and Future. All participants have been muted, and our community space will be the chat box where you are welcome to share your reflections and questions to our speaker, which we will relay to him. We ask you to be respectful in the interactions you have in the chat box. We are also recording this event, so those that are not able to make it today are able to watch it across our social media site. Please turn off your camera if you don't want to be recorded. We will only be publishing the speaker view anyway. I'm just going to go straight into it. I'm going to introduce Sankul now. Hi, Sankul.
Yeah. Hi, Hari. How are you?
I'm good. I think we're just going to start playing your film or your presentation straight away. I think you have your introduction.
Sure.
All good?
Yeah, I do.
All right, Aparna, let's start.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hello everyone, thank you all for tuning in. Welcome to the Oxford Human Rights Festival. Today's seminar is going to be on the topic of the caste system in India, its past, present and future. I hope you're all doing fine, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening based on where you're watching this from around the world. I hope I'm audible, and apologies in advance for any background noise you hear today. There's a festival in India today, so unlike the Oxford Human Rights Festival, festivals here can tend to get quite chaotic. Before we get started, just a few special people I would like to thank. First of all, thank you to Harikrishnan for having me for the seminar. It has been really fun working with you, and I have learned a lot from you in the past few months. Thank you to Elizabeth Laskar and Aparna Maladkar for organizing this event. And thank you to Brookes College and Oxford University for inviting me. And last but not least, thank you to all of you for tuning in. It really means a lot. So just to give you a quick introduction of myself, my name is Sankul Sonawane. I'm a 18-year-old student activist from Pune, India. I read and write about caste and politics, caste in politics, and I also like to talk about these two subjects as I will be doing today. Just to give you a quick preview of what I'm going to be talking about today, I will be talking about the caste system, its origins, how it came to be what it is today, how it consolidated over time, and also caste in modern India, how it shapes Indian society in 2021 and the role it plays in contemporary culture. Also, I will be talking about what the future holds for caste. So without further ado, let's get started with our seminar. So the caste system in India is the longest surviving hierarchical structure. It is a social hierarchical structure that divides humans into 4 castes. And it originated around 3,000 years ago in the Rig Veda. So the caste system actually plays a very crucial role in the Indian society. Based on what caste you're born into, it decides pretty much most aspects of your life. Where you're born, which school you go to, which college you go to, whom you befriend, who you marry, even where you die. All of these aspects are decided by which caste you're born into. And to really understand what the caste system is, we really have to go back 3,000 years ago in time to its first mention, which is in the Rig Veda. So in the Rig Veda, and to be specific, the Purusha Shuktam, it states that from the head of the Brahma, who is the creator of the universe, came the Brahmins. After that, from the shoulders of the Brahma came the Kshatriyas. From the thighs of the Brahma came the Vaishyas, and from the feet of the Brahma came the Shudras. Now, the Brahmins, because they came from the head of the Brahma, are the knowledgeable ones, the scholars and the teachers and the priests, and they are the ones who are considered as the messengers of God. Then the Kshatriyas, who came from the shoulder, therefore, are the warriors and the ruling class. Then are the Vaishyas, who are the merchants and traders. And then at the bottom are the Shudras, who are the peasants and the laborers. Now, outside of these 4 castes, there is a 5th type of caste, which is the caste called as the untouchables. Untouchables because they were literally untouchables. This caste is called as the Dalits, or in ancient times they were called as the Atishudras. Now the Dalits are the ones who have to perform the most degrading sort of jobs in the world. They are the ones who are considered the most impure, and they are the ones who are subjected to the most amount of humiliation in society. Now the caste system is basically based on this idea of karma, where basically the kind of crimes that you have done in your past life will decide what caste you're born into. Therefore, if you are someone who has done good deeds in your past life, you will be born as a Brahmin. And if you have done bad deeds in your last life, you will be born as a Dalit. Therefore, being born as a Dalit is basically like a punishment for what you have done in your past life. Now, also what is important to note here is the sort of purity that is associated with the caste system in India. So the Brahmins, since they are at the top, are considered the most pure and the most holy of all of those in the land. And the Dalits being at the bottom of this pit, in fact, being outside of this structure, are considered the most impure and the most filthy. Therefore, they are reduced to doing the tasks which are the filthiest ones in society. Now, after the Rig Veda, which was written around 1200 to 900 BC, which is almost 3,000 years ago, we have the Manusmriti, which consolidated all the power in the hands of the Brahmins and snatched away all the rights from the Shudras and the Ati-Shudras, who are the Dalits. So according to the Manusmriti, a Shudra is not fit to get education. He shall remain uneducated, and education is basically only, a right of the Brahmins, who are considered as the supreme beings. Apart from this, in the Dharma Sutras as well, it says that if Shudra is, accidentally listening to the Vedic recitation, the holy recitation, his ears shall be filled with molten lead. And if he is the one reciting it, then his tongue shall be chopped off. So therefore, in the very sort of structure and the formation of this caste system, you can see that the Shudras and the Ati-Shudras have been given very little rights, that they have sort of been denied basic human dignity, and that the power has basically been handed to the Brahmins. And therefore, the caste system in its very origins and its very, I would say, structure or its very formation is unequal and very discriminatory in nature towards the ones who are at the bottom of this pile. In these olden times was quite brutal. In fact, if I have to talk about specific, I would say specific time period, under the Peshwa rule in Maharashtra, to be specific in Pune, the Dalits had to face the worst kind of discrimination. The Dalits were made to, in fact, carry pots around their necks. Like they literally had to tie the pot around their necks so that when they spit, the spit should not touch the ground. It should fall into the pot, because their spit would sort of make the land unholy or impure. Also, they had to tie a broom to their backs, because when they walk, the land that they walk on should not be polluted. Therefore, they had to tie the brooms to their backs. Also, they had to make sure that their shadow does not fall on a Brahmin, because their shadow would make the Brahmin impure. These were the kind of horrific situations that the Dalits had to live and endure back in the times of the Peshwas. And this is actually not from a very long time ago. To be specific, this is about around 200 years ago. To be specific, in that very same time period, if you go a bit south from Maharashtra to Kerala, in the kingdom of Travancore, the Dalit women, or the lower caste women actually, had to pay a tax to cover their breasts. This was done to sort of not give them the modesty that every woman should have the right to. In fact, there is a story of a woman named Nangeli who chopped off her breasts because the kind of humiliation that she had to face, and therefore she died because of the loss of blood. And then her husband too actually uh, killed himself after her death. So this was the kind of situation that the Dalits had to live and survive under in those times. In fact, this is something that I myself learned at a very young age, because my ancestors were Mahars who lived in Maharashtra, in Pune, where the Brahmin Peshwas were the rulers. So they told me at a very young age about this system of caste inequality and the kind of ostracization that we faced in those times, about how we had to carry pots around our necks and brooms attached to our backs so that we should not pollute the land. We were also not allowed to live in the villages. We had to live outside of the villages, and we had to do the most horrific and the most menial and the most degrading tasks. In fact, in my caste, which is the Mahars, we had to skin dead animals, to basically to earn our livelihood. Even after the fall of the Peshwa Empire, the situation of the Dalits still remained the same. They still had to endure the same discrimination that they did at the hands of the Peshwas. It was at that time that Jyotiba Phule decided to start the first anti-caste movement in Maharashtra. Jyotiba Phule was an educationist, a reformer, and a rationalist who decided to question the Brahminical hegemony of that time. He was born in 1827 to a Mali caste, which are considered the Shudras. From a very young age, he was good at education, and he, at a young age, got married to Savitribai Phule as well. At that time, the education of women was a very rare occurrence, but Jyotiba Phule decided to educate his wife. Then he attended the wedding of a Brahmin, but he was humiliated because of his lower Shudra caste. He decided to therefore he decided to educate the lower caste people as well as the women. During those times, the practice of untouchability, sati, child marriage, and the vilification of widows was very prevalent. Not only did Jyotiba Phule educate Savitri Mai, he also then opened the school for girls in 1948. This was the first school in India for girls at that time. By 1953, he had opened 3 schools where over 273 girls were being educated. For educating the girls, the couple was ostracized by society and they were forced to leave their own house. They were then accepted at the house of Fatima Begum Sheikh. After this, they also opened their schools to Dalits and other backward castes. This at the time was considered treasonous by the Brahmins, who considered that the right to education should only belong with the Brahmins. In fact, when Savitribai would be going to educate the Dalits, in the schools, the Brahmins would throw cow dung and stones at her to sort of scare her. And Savitribai had to carry an extra sari with her, an extra clothing garment with her, because her clothes would, her clothes would get dirty because of the cow dung that these upper caste men would throw at her. Such was the opposition to educating Dalits and women back then. Along with educating the Dalits and the women, Jyotiba Phule also criticized the Vedas and the sort of Brahminical hegemony that existed in those times on education. He also started the Satyashuddhik Samaj in 1873 to, promote rational thought and sort of spread the word of rationality with the downtrodden and the oppressed. This was also criticized by the Brahmins, who called Phule an anti-national and a traitor of the religion. Now, the anti-caste movement, which was started by Phule, was then carried on by Ambedkar. Ambedkar himself considered himself to be a disciple of Phule and took great inspiration from all that Phule had done for the upliftment of the downtrodden. Babasaheb Ambedkar was born on the 14th of April 1891 in Mao to a Mahar caste. Now, Mahar is a Dalit caste, and as I mentioned earlier, these are the same people who had to, carry the pots around their neck and brooms to their backs by the Peshwa rulers in the early 18th century. Now, from a very young age, Ambedkar faced discrimination because of his caste. When he was in school, he was made to sit outside of the classroom, and he was not allowed the same treatment as the upper caste people from the upper caste as the upper caste students because of his Dalit caste. Even in public spaces, the Dalits were not allowed to enter and pollute those spaces because their very presence was considered to be polluting the society. Now, despite all the discrimination that Ambedkar faced back in those days, he still succeeded at his education. he first got a BA from Mumbai and then got a scholarship to go to Columbia from the from the Maharaja of Baroda, which was Sayyaji Gaikwad. After getting an MA from Columbia, he then attended London School of Economics, after which he also practiced law at Gray's Inn. In fact, in total, Ambedkar had 8 degrees. He had a BA, MA, MSc, DSc, PhD, LLD, D.Litt Bar at Law. That's a total of 8 degrees. And he was also the first PhD holder, I think, from India at the time, which was a very rare feat for Dalit, considering that Dalits were not even allowed to get education at the time, let alone get a higher education, which Ambedkar did from one of the most prominent and well-known universities in the world. Despite all his education abroad, he still wanted to come back and fight for the rights of his community, the oppressed class of the time. So after coming to India, Ambedkar then started newspapers, and he also practiced law in court to fight for the rights of his people who were facing discrimination at the time. He then soon started the movement of Mahar Satyagraha, which was in 1927, to be specific, on 20th of March 1927. The Mahar Satyagraha was a movement to grant drinking rights to Dalits, drinking water, to drinking water rights to Dalits. Dalits, as I said, were not allowed to enter public spaces, and this means that they were also not allowed to drink the water from the public wells and the public tanks at the time. Such was the humiliation of Dalits at the time that they were not even allowed to drink the water from the public well. And honestly, even in some parts of India today, it is still practiced. Now, what Ambedkar did was that he wanted to challenge this apartheid of against the Dalits, and therefore he gathered thousands of his followers, and together they marched to the Chaudatara in Mahad, and they drank the water on March the 20th, 1927. And quite ironically, a riot soon broke out after Ambedkar decided to drink the water from a public well. The Brahmins, they were very enraged at this sort of defiance by a Dalit, and they were so furious that a Dalit had polluted the public space, that they decided to purify this Chaudatara by using cow dung and cow urine. It's quite hilarious that they actually considered the shit of the cow and the urine of the cow to be more pure than the Dalit humans. And quite ironically, it is still the case even today in India. Later that year, Ambedkar also burned the Manusmriti, the text that I just had mentioned earlier, which used to discriminate against the Dalits. The burning of this Manusmriti was considered to signify the freeing of the Dalits and the women from this oppressive system and this oppressive orthodoxy. After this, in 1930, I think, he also started the Kayam temple entry movement, because at that time Dalits were not allowed to enter the temples either. So the Dalit Hindus who were worshipping the Hindu religion, they were not even allowed entry into the temples of their own gods, because they were considered unholy to enter the temples. So Ambedkar then chose the Kayam temple, and he once again shattered the sort of Brahminical hegemony on these spaces by entering the Kayam temple with his followers. Now, another significant movement about Ambedkar came in 1932, when Ramsay MacDonald, on suggestion of Ambedkar, in fact, granted the separate electorates, or the communal award as it was called, to the Dalits. Now, what the separate electorates were was basically that they were separate voting rights for the Dalits. So a Dalit leader would be elected by the Dalits of the country. And this was quite common at the time, because all the other minorities, such as Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, also had this separate electorates. And in fact, they had separate electorates since 1909. Ambedkar, of course, welcomed this move, as he thought this would grant political rights to the Dalits at the time. However, Mahatma Gandhi, who was a staunch supporter of the caste system in India, he vehemently opposed this move. He thought that this move would, divide the Hindus. However, what he failed to understand was that the Hindus were already divided for thousands of years because of this caste system, and there was no way that a communal award or a separate electorates or some kind of a voting rights would divide them any further than they had already been divided. But Gandhi was not one to listen. He decided to fast unto death to oppose this move. And unless Ambedkar turned down the separate electorates or the voting rights that had been granted to his people, Gandhi would not eat and starve himself to death. Now, of course, Ambedkar initially, of course, did not want to give up the separate electorates. He was not quite okay giving up the rights of his people, because Gandhi had decided to oppose it. Even some Dalit leaders of the time, even some anti-caste leaders of the time, in fact, such as Thantai Periyar, had told him that let Gandhi die, our rights are more important. but Ambedkar had to concede the voting rights that he had been granted, because at that time Ambedkar had begun to receive death threats by the supporters of Gandhi, and also at the same time he had to realize that if Gandhi died because of this fast, the Dalits around the country who are already vulnerable and oppressed, they would be butchered like animals if something was to happen to Gandhi. Therefore, Gandhi had to give up the separate electorates that were awarded to him and his people because of the fast of Mahatma Gandhi. They then signed the Pune Pact in, I think, 1935 in, of course, Pune. And therefore, after this Pune Pact was signed, Ambedkar called it the greatest blackmail in the history of the country. And Ambedkar and Gandhi actually were opposed on many topics. In fact, Ambedkar actually said that Gandhi was merely an episode in the history of India, never an epoch maker. But I think in recent times, the sort of whitewashing of Gandhi has been done by the Congress party. And I think what is really important to note here is the fact that the Congress party actually came to power in India and stayed in power in India for 30 years consecutively. So what the Congress party did was they basically sort of whitewashed all the crimes of Gandhi and made him into a cult of personality like a figure. So therefore, this sort of Pune Pact and even, let's say, the Simon Commission and many of these historical events were sort of changed, and the narrative of these, I would say, historical events were changed, to suit the narrative of the Congress, to suit the sort of propaganda that was spread around Gandhi. The reason why Ambedkar and I critique Gandhi so much is because of how much he has been whitewashed and indoctrinated in the minds of the Indians. If you read some of the earlier writings of Gandhi, he has written some of the most racist and vilest things about the black people in South Africa. In fact, if you want an example of how racist he was and the kind of brainwashing that has been done regarding him, let's remember how we were taught that Gandhi was thrown off a train by the white people for opposing segregation. The truth is that Gandhi never opposed segregation. In fact, he just wanted access to the white compartment on the train. See, Gandhi believed in the supremacy of the Aryan race, and he also thought that the Indians and the Europeans are both belonging to the Aryan race. He was never against the oppression of black people. He just wanted to be as privileged as the white man in oppressing the black people. And his sort of, I would say, the whitewashing of his legacy is not only limited to racism. Even when it comes to women, the kind of views that Gandhi had on women are shocking. In fact, he slept with his teenage niece, at the age of, in his 70s he was, when he was sleeping naked with his nieces to test his celibacy. He even despised his own wife. And even when Gandhi came back to India, he never fought for the rights of the Dalits. People often credit Gandhi with uplifting the Dalits. He was never concerned about uplifting the Dalits, Gandhi roaming around naked and calling us Harijans did not emancipate us. Ambedkar wearing a three-piece suit and granting us rights is what emancipated us. Now, coming back to Ambedkar, Ambedkar was later then appointed as the head of the drafting committee of the Constitution. It's quite ironic that an untouchable whose people had been barred from seeking education was now going to write the constitution of the largest democracy in the world. Now, it would be unfair to reduce Ambedkar's legacy to merely being the writer of the constitution, as most people in India do. Ambedkar was far more than that. Ambedkar always believed in uplifting all the oppressed masses. In fact, he not just fought for the right of the Dalits, but he also fought for the rights of the women and the working class. Long before the concept of minimum wages was in the mainstream discussion of American politics, Ambedkar in fact argued for living wages for the laborers who at that time were mostly the Shudras and the Atishudras in the second roundtable conference. Now, not just that, but he also did many reforms for the working class later on, such as trade unionizing and also a 48-hour work week. Ambedkar then also fought for the upliftment of women through the Hindu Code Bill. In those times, women were granted very few rights. In fact, they actually had to live at the mercy of the men. They had no rights to freedom, property, or equality. It was actually Ambedkar who granted them rights and equality in all the sectors. Now, back then, this move was actually strongly opposed by the upper caste men at that time who did not consider women to be equal to men. And they strongly opposed Ambedkar in drafting the Hindu Code Bill. The Hindu Code Bill was what was going to, bring equality to the women and, put them on an equal standing with the men. So similar to how Mahatma Jyotirao Phule and Savitribai Phule were opposed by the upper caste men for educating the women, Ambedkar was also opposed by the sort of, the upper caste people for, trying to give equal rights to women. However, Ambedkar did succeed in his quest for emancipating women. So, today a large chunk of the rights for women and the rights for the working class has to go to Ambedkar. Honestly, I could go on and talk about Ambedkar all day, but even an entire day would not be enough to list his accomplishments. But I'm going to have to stop here because we're kind of short on time. Now, coming to the treatment of Dalits post-independence, initially there was a great hope that once the British are gone, the Dalits would finally be granted equality in India. However, it turned out that the independence of India was a transfer of power from the hands of the British to the hands of the Savarnas. The Congress party, after coming to power, ruled consecutively for almost 30 years. And what they did was that they erased the legacy of Ambedkar and made Gandhi and Nehru into the fathers of the nation. Now, even if you look at most of the leaders, the freedom fighters that we were taught in school, they were all from the Congress party. So the Congress, in a way, they credited themselves with granting independence to India and erased the legacy of all the other freedom fighters who were not associated with the Congress. Tilak, Bose, Gokhale, Patel, etc. These were all Congress leaders and all were upper caste. In fact, the Congress party as a whole was a den of the upper castes. And it's not just the Congress. The second largest party of the time, the Communists, was also filled with only upper caste leaders at the top, such as Dange, Joshi, Randive. And it's not just the Congress or the Communist Party. Even the current ruling Bharatiya Janata Party has a majority of upper castes in its top party leadership. And throughout the 73 years of independence in India, even the top post of the Prime Minister has in a way sort of been dominated by the upper caste leaders. Of the 13 Prime Ministers that India has had, 6 of them have been Brahmins, and even of the remaining 7, all have been Savarnas. There has never been a Dalit or an Adivasi Prime Minister. So despite representing more than 25% of the population, Dalits and Adivasis have not even been considered for the post of the Prime Minister, whereas the Brahmins, who are only the 3 to 4% of the population, have had almost half the Prime Ministers. In fact, the Brahmins have ruled, the country for 50 of the 73 years that India has been free. Now, to counter this sort of hegemony in politics of the upper castes, Manevar Kashiram started the Bhausen Samaj party in 1984. So through this party, he tried to spread the message of social justice, and he traveled literally throughout the country on a bicycle. It was due to his hard work that India saw its first Dalit chief minister, that was his protege Mayavathi, in the year 1995. Mayavathi was elected as the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh for 4 terms, in fact. And Uttar Pradesh is the largest state in India. And it was a great, I would say, miracle of democracy that a Dalit woman got to be the chief minister of the largest state of the country. However, despite being elected for 4 terms, Mayavathi was always hated and vilified by the media or the politicians or, the sort of people who would mostly be upper castes. In fact, I think a few years ago, a BJP politician even called Mayavathi worse than a prostitute. And that's the kind of vilification that has happened of Dalit leaders in this country. And a large reason for this vilification of Dalit leaders in this country is because of the role that the media plays in this sort of narrative that is spread about how Dalit leaders and Dalits as a whole are incompetent to rule and to govern and to be elected as the representatives of the people. It is not that Mayavathi was an incompetent leader. In fact, if you want me to list out the achievements of Mayavathi, she gave a basic income to the poorest of the poor. She built expressways. The law and situation order was in fact better under her term than the succeeding or the preceding terms. She also empowered the women in the state. Fewer riots happened under her reign. Least rapes happened, and corruption was also at an all-time low. She also gave affirmative action to Dalits in the state, in the private sector. This move was actually later quashed by the Supreme Court of India. Now, what was the biggest achievement of Mayavathi was that she managed to empower the Dalits in the state of Uttar Pradesh and all around the country. What she gave was a sense of pride and a sense of dignity to the Dalits. She taught them not to be ashamed of themselves and their identity, which is what the sort of message that was given to the Dalits for thousands of years. Now, if you look at why Mayavathi was sort of hated by the upper caste media, the reason is very simple. It's because of her caste identity, and it's not a new phenomenon. Even Ambedkar was sort of shunned by the upper caste media back when he was fighting for the rights of the Dalits. And a big reason why the media sort of vilifies the Dalit leaders is because the media is owned by the upper caste, is run by the upper caste, and is operated by the upper castes. In fact, if I have to give you the statistics of the sort of hegemony of the upper castes in the media, over 85 to 90% of the mainstream media houses are owned by the upper castes. Of the 121 newsroom leadership positions, 106 have been occupied by the upper castes, whereas none have been filled by the Dalits or the Adivasis. 3 out of 4 anchors of flagship debate shows are upper castes. None of them is Dalit or Adivasi once again. For over the 70% of the flagship debate shows, most of the majority of the sort of panelists are again from the upper castes. Not more than 5% of the articles written in English newspapers are by Dalits and Adivasis. In the Hindi newspapers, the sort of representation of Dalits and Adivasis is once again only at around 10%. So once again, the domination of the upper castes in the media is what has led to the vilification of Dalit leaders and the suppression of the Dalit of the narrative. The upper castes, who are only 15% of the population, control almost all of the media. And they do this to sort of silence the Dalit assertion and the Dalit rights. Therefore, you will never see a Dalit leader being praised by the media. Not now, not ever, and it never has been. It's no wonder that someone like Mayavathi could not win over the media, despite being elected as the chief minister of the state of Uttar Pradesh for 4 terms. And that's why Ambedkar, even when he came back from the UK to India, he first started a newspaper called the Mutnaik in 1920, and then started many more newspapers to sort of start talking about the rights of the Dalits, because he knew that the upper caste newspapers and at that time would never fight for the rights of Dalits, because the Dalits are not allowed to enter the media. They have to create their own media and set their own narrative. Whenever a Dalit movement takes place, the first and foremost counter argument of the upper castes is that, what about reservations? Why can't you get rid of reservations? Why the reservation still exists? Now, that is what is on their minds 24/7, 7 days a week, 52 weeks of the year. They are always focused on the reservations, because the reservations they feel is discrimination towards them, which is quite frankly ridiculous. Now, what reservations is basically is a form of affirmative action given to the backward caste, the Dalits, Adivasis, and the OBCs. Now, first of all, what the upper castes fail to understand is the concept of reservations in itself. To put it simply, the reservation is a form of affirmative action that is meant to guarantee education to the marginalized and the downtrodden people of the society according to their proportion of their population. So if Dalits are like 17% of the population, they get 12.5% of the seats in government colleges. Adivasis, who are 9% of the population, they get 7% seats of the population. And it is not just India where the concept of reservations exists. All around the world, you have the concept of reservation, or as they call it abroad, the concept of affirmative action to sort of correct the historical wrongs that have been committed against the downtrodden people. In fact, 25% of all the countries in the world practice the system of affirmative action, such as South Africa, Brazil, United States of America, etc. Now, these are the countries where there is a history of discrimination. And where there is a history of discrimination, there is the reservation. The UK, although, does not have reservations, because I think if they did, they would have to provide justice to more than half the world. Anyways, to actually focus on a reservation in the Indian context, what we need to understand is the context of caste and the history of caste. For over 3,000 years, Dalits were literally barred from getting education. It was only 70 years ago that finally some sort of justice was provided to us in the field of education and jobs. And often the sort of argument that is put forward by the upper caste once again is that reservation kills merit. Now, this is a futile argument. What is merit and how do you define this merit? Upper castes are often quoted saying that they are not responsible for the crimes of their ancestors. Of course, you are not responsible for the crimes of your ancestors, but you inherit the caste privilege, the social capital, the caste connections, the financial wealth, etc., from the oppression of their ancestors. From this oppression of the ancestors is how they form their merit. It is an accumulation of all the sort of historical injustices that have happened against the downtrodden people of society. Getting education for Dalits is a very difficult task. They have to face discrimination in schools, in colleges, public places, workplaces. Everywhere a Dalit goes, even today, he has to face that caste discrimination. And even if you look at, for example, for argument's sake, what happens if you take away reservations? So then what are you left with? If you look at the private colleges in India, such as Jindal and Ashoka, there is almost zero representation of Dalits in these colleges. They simply cannot afford taking admission in these kind of colleges. In fact, if you go beyond the sort of field of education and look at the representation of Dalits in the major fields in India, if you look at academia, judiciary, corporate media, film, television, sport, art, business, etc., there is no reservation in these fields. And the Dalit representation in these fields, therefore, is almost zero. In fact, in some fields, it is zero. And what is the merit of these fields is what we need to question. What is the merit of Bollywood, where they promote blackface and rape culture? In television, where you show humans turning into flies and snakes? In academia, where some kind of a academian says that they will create a machine where a man can carry his wealth into the next generation, into his next life, in fact. After he dies, he can take his wealth in the current life and he can take it into his next life. This is what the academians in India actually discuss. In judiciary, you have the Chief Justice of India asking a rapist if he wants to marry his minor victim. In media, you have the journalists turning into lapdogs of the current fascist ruling government. And these are all fields which are dominated 100% and occupied by the upper castes. But no one asks about the merit here. It is only when a Dalit gets educated, when a Dalit, arises from his discrimination and arises from his poverty and gets education and does well in society, it is that when they have a problem with the merit. They don't have a problem with the merit when the fields that they dominate have a sheer a lack or an absence of merit. So they don't really have a problem with reservation when the reservation is given to them 100% in all of these fields where they dominate all of these sectors. But it is only when a Dalit gets educated, that is when they have a problem with the sort of concept of representation or affirmative action. And even the reservation that they cry about so much is not implemented properly. The caste quotas are often not filled as they should be according to the
proportionate population, even in the premier Indian institutes like the IITs and IIMs, there is a sheer lack of Dalit representation, which comes along with the rampant casteism. So high is the casteism that Dalit Adivasi students are forced to die by suicide. The case of Rohit Vemula proves this point. Rohit Vemula was a PhD scholar at the Hyderabad Central University. He was born to a Dalit caste and he was a beneficiary of reservation. However, from July 2015, the university stopped paying his monthly stipend of 25,000 rupees, on which he was not only surviving himself but also taking care of his family. Then a few months later, the BJP MP called for action against Vemula because according to him, Vemula was taking part in sort of anti-national activities. Now, what he means by anti-national activities is that he was a part of an Ambedkarite organization which was opposed to the ruling BJP government. Rohit Vemula was soon after that suspended along with 4 others from his Ambedkarite association. And then finally, on the 17th of January 2017, he died by suicide after almost a month after his suspension was upheld. And in his final letter, a suicide note, he wrote that my death was a fatal accident. He talked about how he wanted to be a writer, and it was a brutal state-sponsored murder of Rohit Vemula, and they crushed his dreams. They crushed his dreams of being a writer and of living a full life. And it's not just Rohit Vemula who suffers from who suffered from caste discrimination in these kind of colleges. Another example would be of Payal Tadvi, who was a Adivasi student who died by suicide because of the caste discrimination that she faced at the hands of her upper caste colleagues. Payal was the first woman from her community, the Adivasi community, to be a doctor, but her life also was cut short because of her caste. And casteism is still rampant in education, be it in schools or colleges. Dalits and Adivasis have to endure and overcome this sort of caste prejudice in order to educate themselves. It starts from the kindergarten teacher who makes these Dalits sit on the last bench of the classroom to the university professor who grades them less because of their lack of merit. Even now, if you go to the villages and if you see the schools in the villages, the Dalit students are made to sweep the floors of the class, and they are made to sit on the last bench of the classroom. And they are the ones who are made to do the kind of menial tasks that their ancestors had to do. While the upper caste students, they sit on the first benches and get the sort of education that Dalit students do not get. And this still exists in India today, by the way, even in 2021, even in the present day and age. If you just simply look at some of the documentaries of caste discrimination on YouTube, they're all available up there. Like, for example, the documentary by Stalin K called as India Untouched. Even then, you can see the very first sort of scene in that documentary shows how Dalits even today have to endure this sort of brutal caste discrimination and untouchability. In this modern day and age, we still have to go through that kind of discrimination that our ancestors have been going through for thousands of years. And now it is not only the education where the Dalits face the discrimination and assault. The crimes against Dalits happen in all fields, all around the country, across all regions, genders, and age groups. A Dalit can simply never overcome the brutality of caste. If you look at the crime statistics, a crime is committed against a Dalit every 15 minutes. So literally every 15 minutes, a Dalit is assaulted in some part of the country in one form or another. Now, if this seminar is of like 1.5 hours, so by the time this seminar will end, there will be at least 6 crimes committed against Dalits. Every single day, 2 Dalits are killed. In 2019 alone, 46,000 crimes were committed against Dalits. In 2017 and 2018, 43,000 crimes were committed against Dalits. In 2016, 40,000 crimes. In fact, from the data from 2006 to 2015, it says that there were more than 4 lakh crimes committed against the Dalits. So once again, that's still an average of more than 40,000 crimes per year. And these are only the cases which are registered. According to the Human Rights Watch, it says that the real number of crimes committed against Dalits is more than 1 lakh crimes per year. However, the Dalits are unable to sort of report these crimes because of the fear of even more brutality against them in the system. And women face even more brutality because of the caste. Every single day in India, 10 Dalit women are raped. Every single day. Can you imagine that? And a lot of these rapes are based because of caste. Just last year in 2020, a 19-year-old Dalit girl was raped by 4 upper caste Thakur men. So brutal was her rape that her spinal cord was broken and her tongue was chopped off. This is the kind of punishment for Dalits. It is prescribed in the Manusmriti and the Dharma Shastras. Even the police did not register a complaint for a week. She was also denied medical treatment immediately after her rape. Eventually, she died in the hospital, but not before she named the 4 men who raped her. But the police then burned her dead body, in the middle of the night, without even taking the consent of the family to sort of avoid any kind of protest or backlash against the rape of this Dalit girl. There were marches carried out in support of the rapists of the girl by some upper caste groups. The family was threatened by their neighbors and the upper caste people. Even the district magistrate, manipulated and sort of threatened the family. Now, currently, this case of the Hathras victim is in court, but just last week in court, the upper caste lawyers, they literally threatened the family of this girl who was the rape victim. And in open court, this happened, and there is still no justice given to this family. Lawlessness against Dalits is completely normal in India, and it always has been. If you look at the story of Bhausen, who was a Dalit laborer from Punjab, in the year 2000, his minor daughter was raped by Savarna men, but he had the courage of fighting for her justice, so he took these men to court. Now, this is a very rare occurrence for a Dalit. In fact, it was the first time that a Dalit from that region had actually secured to get justice by managing to convict these Savarna men for the rape of his daughter. However, he had to pay a heavy price for that. Just a few years later, he was beaten brutally by Savarna men for filing a case against their community for his daughter's rape and even getting a conviction. In fact, he was beaten so brutally that he lost 3 of his limbs. He lost 2 of his hands and he lost 1 of his feet. And that was what he had to, suffer for trying to get justice for his daughter and for trying to, oppose the rape of his daughter. However, the story of Bhausen is not one of tragedy and despair. It is one of hope and determination. When Bhausen was getting treated in the hospital for his injury, and when 3 of his limbs has been amputated, he did not lose hope. He started singing. He started singing about the struggle and the marginalization of the Dalit land laborers and the peasants. And ever since then, he has been fighting for the rights of these people, and he has been very vocal in his fight against the oppression, because of caste. I actually had the pleasure of meeting Bhausen a couple of months ago, and it was truly inspirational to meet him. Honestly, I could not understand a lot of what he spoke because we speak different languages. But the way he sang, the sort of pain and the sort of resistance and the sort of disruption that he had in his voice, it was truly inspirational. And I think people like Bhausen need to be celebrated. You can't change what happened in the past, but the very least this country could do to make up for its crimes against people like Bhausen is that we need to share his story, his heroics, and his fight against his oppression, because it's the very least that he deserves. And these kind of Dalit atrocities keep on happening. But why don't they stop? Because the upper caste people don't want them to stop. Right now, if you just open Google and just type on Google, don't even hit the search button, just type on Google, Dalit man, and the sort of autocorrect bar or the suggestion bar, it will automatically recommend you, Dalit man killed for riding a horse, Dalit man killed for wearing a shoe, Dalit man killed for watching some dance, Dalit man killed for eating in front of upper castes, Dalit man killed for growing a mustache, Dalit man killed for all sorts of basic human things. I kid you not, these are all actual reports. I am not even going to go into the specifics of this. But can you imagine the kind of inhumane treatment this country, showers upon us Dalits, when it kills us for growing a mustache or riding a horse or wearing some kind of a shoe or wearing some kind of a cloth or watching some kind of a dance or eating in front of the upper castes or any of the 100 reasons, 100 petty things. These are not even basic human rights. These are less than basic human rights. This is, even animals have more rights in this country than us. And somehow this is normalized. Killing Dalits for these kind of things is normalized. And it's not just these things. India has a systemic form of oppression called as manual scavenging. So manual scavenging is the type of, I would say, almost slavery, where a Dalit man has to climb into the gutter to clean your shit. I kid you not, actual shit. The human excreta that comes out of your body every morning, the Dalit man goes into the manholes and he cleans that. And it's only the Dalits who do that. Not every not every Dalit is a manual scavenger. I myself am not a manual scavenger, but every manual scavenger is a Dalit. And even though I myself have never climbed into a manhole or into a gutter or into a sewer, but my Dalit brothers are out there and they have to do this caste occupation that has been forced upon them by the upper caste people, and they die every single day. Every single day. In fact, according to estimates, it says that more than 600 people die climbing into the gutters and cleaning your shit. Why don't we care about these people? Why are these people not a matter of national priority? Why is this not a topic for for debate, for discourse, for the manifesto in the elections? No one cares about this. Just 2 days ago, I read a report that 2 men died while cleaning a gutter. They were forced to clean the gutter, in fact. Why is this still happening in modern day India in 2021? Nowhere around the world, nowhere, not a single place around the world do you have this system where you send people into the gutter to clean your shit. There are countries that are far poorer than India. No offense, but you look at sort of like the African countries or the South American countries. They are even poorer and even less developed than India. They don't send people into gutters to clean their shit. Only in India does this happen. And this happens to satisfy the ego, the casteist ego of the upper caste people. Why are they not stopping this? The Dalit man does not want to climb into a gutter. You think we have some kind of a hobby or some kind of a natural, instinct that we are attracted to climbing into gutters and cleaning your shit? You can't even look at your shit for more than 5 seconds. We are being made to climb into the gutter and touch it with our bare hands and clean it for you. You are sending us to swim in that shit. You are sending us to almost bathe in that shit. How is this still normalized? And gee, I honestly believe it is the responsibility of every upper caste person to do whatever they can in their capacity to stop this system. Because this should not be happening in 2020. This is inhumane. This is brutal. This is mind-blowing, honestly. This has no place in a civilized society in 2021. And yet somehow we are still practicing it in India because Dalit lives don't matter in India. Now, one Dalit atrocity that really affected me a lot was the murder of a Dalek boy last year. It was a 19-year-old Dalek boy who was murdered for being in love with an upper caste girl. And this atrocity happened just about 2 kilometers away from my house. And the reason this was so brutal was because I just sort of realized that this very well could have been me, and just the way in which he was he was murdered, it was an indication of how easy it is for a Dalit to get killed for something as simple as falling in love with a girl who just happens to be upper caste. He was killed in broad daylight on the roads. On the roads, the family of this girl, the upper caste family, they hit him with their, with their four-wheeler. They hit him when he was driving on his scooter. And then as he was injured, they literally beat him up to death. They beat him up so bad that he died. And as they beat him up, as they were beating him up, they literally spit on him. They spit on him and they abused him with caste slurs. So that is how rampant it is, how rampant the problem of the caste system is today here in India, and not just in India, but this incident happened in Pune, by the way. This incident happened in Pune, which is considered a very modern city. Often people like to say that caste does not exist in cities anymore. This incident happened 2 kilometers away from my house in one of the most sort of, developed cities in the country. And yet people still deny caste. What am I supposed to say to these people? Intercaste killings are very, very common in India. And why are they common? Because Dalits are not seen as worthy of marrying someone from the upper castes. Even today, they are seen as inferior and they are seen as not equal to the upper castes. And why? Why is it that they are killed? It's because the country allows them to get killed. The country allows, the Dalits to get killed. Everywhere, everywhere you see caste, everywhere there is a systemic sort of discrimination. As I just mentioned, in sort of various forms of discrimination happens. If a Dalit has to go to the court, he will not get justice in the court. Why? Because the courts are dominated by the upper caste people. There is a very serious lack of representation in the courts. In fact, from 1950 to 1989, almost 90% of the judges were Brahmins. So 3% of the Brahmins are 90% of the judges. And of course, they are going to side with the oppressors of the Dalits. So Dalits cannot expect justice from them here once again as well. So the problem of the Dalits here in 2021 is that there is a systemic form of discrimination that still exists. And unless we are willing to address the form of systemic discrimination, there is going to be no justice for Dalits. Or, Dalits' lives are not going to matter until we address the form of systemic discrimination that happens against us. And if we have to talk about the future of caste now, the first thing that we need to do to, solve the problem of casteism is that we need to start treating Dalits as humans. In the present scenario, Dalits are not being treated as humans by the upper caste counterparts. What happens in India right now is that Dalits are treated as inferior. If you look at, I'm not just talking about the sort of the caste atrocities that happen. Of course, the caste atrocities are very brutal and very rampant, and they happen on a alarming scale. But at the same time, you look at the sort of the subtle forms of casteism. In India, let's say your house help. The woman who comes to clean your house, the house help. You look at how you treat her. The house help cannot sit on the sofa in India. She has to sit on the ground, on the floor. There is literally in some of the posh societies in the city, you have separate lifts for the workers, for the watchman and the house help and all of these sort of people who do these sort of low wage occupations. So this is how casteism is still prevalent in 2021, and how it will continue to happen unless we address and we sort of understand this problem and tackle it. Even today in the country, even in the cities and the villages, there is caste-based segregation that happens, and it is not just a coincidence. It is a modern day apartheid. In my city in Pune, if you look at all the posh neighborhoods, the likes of Prabhat Road or the likes of Kuriga Park or the likes of Kothur, these are all the places which are, dominated almost entirely by the upper castes. Whereas if you come to the slums and if you come to the low-income areas, you will have these kind of Dalit bastis and the kind of, people from backward castes living here. So there is a caste-based segregation that happens in the cities as well. In the villages, of course, it still happens. It is very rampant. Let's not even talk about that, to be honest. It is just as bad as it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago in the villages, and it still happens. But even in the cities, which are considered as modern and the future, the future of of India, even in the cities, there is an apartheid going on. Even if, let's say, a rich Dalit goes and tries to buy a house in the upscale neighborhoods, they first ask him, "What is your caste?" And if you are a Dalit, you don't get the house. The caste is a very sort of a criteria to get a house in the country. In fact, the caste is a criteria everywhere, as I've just mentioned here. The caste is a criteria of where you are born, of which hospital you are born in, of which school to go to. In fact, even when it comes to schools, there is an apartheid system that the upper caste, localities, they have the posh private schools, whereas the Dalit bastis and the Dalit slums, they have the government schools. And even according to a survey done, the upper caste neighborhoods are far more likely to get a school than the Dalit bastis to get a school. And even in colleges, you have this sort of rampant casteism, and you people in colleges, they make friends on the basis of their caste. Even the sort of the most educated and the most liberal and the most sort of politically correct people, even they make friends on the basis of their caste. So even there, the caste apartheid is still continuing. Even whom you marry and whom you befriend and whom you all of these personal relationships that you form with on the basis of caste. Why? Because you want to continue the caste system and you want to continue the sort of hegemony of caste. If an intercaste marriage happens, that is in a way a protest against the caste system. And there is a reason why they don't happen. India often is talked about as, the home of arranged marriages. What are arranged marriages if not the caste system prevailing? Arranged marriages always only happen, they always happen in your specific caste. You open the newspaper, even the English newspaper, by the way, the elite, the newspaper of the elite people like Times of India or Hindustan Times or whatever. And if you look at the matrimony section, you will have people listing their caste, looking for their caste only. This is a fact. Even in the newspapers, there is this caste-based sort of apartheid or the caste-based segregation that happens. And not just here, but even in, let's say, the workplaces, casteism is rampant in these workplaces. Recently there was the sort of Cisco discrimination case that came out where the upper castes in Silicon Valley were discriminating against the Dalits. See, casteism in workplace in India is of course very common and it happens quite rampantly. And of course, that is almost like as the accepted truth. But even in the United States, you have this problem of caste. And why is it happening? Because as Ambedkar had rightly predicted, if the caste Hindus, if the upper caste Hindus go abroad, then caste will be a global problem. And caste is a global problem. The upper caste Hindus who go abroad, they discriminate against whatever few Dalits who make it out of here. And even in India, if you talk about workplaces, a survey done by Sukhdev Thorat, he sent sort of applications of people, of students with, the same kind of credentials, the same kind of a CV. But on one application, he gave the upper caste surnames, on the other, he gave Dalit or backward class surnames. And the upper caste sort of, upper caste, I would say the upper caste, resumes were far more likely to get accepted. So this is how caste dictates every single aspect of your life, whether you like it or not, whether you would want to accept it or not. It is a crucial part of who you are and how you live your life in India. Going forward, what we need to realize here is that Indians do not need to learn any more about caste. Indians have already learned enough about caste in the past 3,000 years. What needs to happen from here on forward is that Indians need to unlearn the caste system. Indians need to recognize that the Dalits have been oppressed and have been marginalized by the upper castes for thousands of years, and we need to then work towards solving the problem. even today, the problem, as I said, is that Dalits are not treated as humans. They are not treated as equal beings. And the way towards treating Dalits as equal and, human beings is by educating all the children from a very young age about the caste system in India. Once you sort of educate the people about the kind of atrocities that used to take place and still take place in India, that is when you will make the children understand, the future generation understand about why this is such a serious problem and why it needs to be addressed. I have to say that even today, the sort of lack of caste knowledge in India is shocking. It's absolutely shocking that the kids don't even know what the caste system was and how it dictates. Of course, those who have experienced caste know it better than anyone. But those who have not experienced caste, they don't know what their caste privilege is. They don't know how they are benefiting from the caste system in the current day and age. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to sort of put the caste system into the curriculum of the students. Because the caste system or the caste superiority that kids learn, they learn it from their homes. From generations this has been happening, that if the parents put the sort of caste superiority or the caste, I would say, legacy into the minds of their children, and the children then pass it on to their children. So in order to put a stop to this, we need to start from a very young age to teach these kids and to make these kids understand about how the caste system is brutal and how it is, inhumane, and it treats the Dalits as unequals. And moreover, if you look forward towards the problem of the caste system, also what we need to do is we need to go beyond reservations. For so long, we have only kept the conversation stuck at reservations. There has to be more than that. We have to have more diversity in the various fields today in India. The Oscars, they recently had a diversity group of awards, so that, there is not a sort of white hegemony on the Oscar awards. In the similar manner, India needs to at least understand that there needs to be some kind of a Dalit representation in the mainstream culture, which there is none of. Forget about the awards. The Dalits are not even participating right now in the sort of mainstream culture. So in order to solve all of these problems of caste and of, casteism in India, what needs to happen first and foremost is that we need to develop empathy for the Dalits. We need to develop the sort of, understanding of what the caste system is. This needs to be taught. This needs to be sort of educated to the kids from a very young age. Unless and until we don't address this problem, we cannot solve the problem. Even today, there are people who deny the caste system in India. Denying the problem isn't going to get us anywhere. In fact, it's only going to take us backwards. If you look at the caste atrocities, they have not reduced, they have not reduced throughout time. They're only increasing. And in order to put a stop to all of these things and to finally give Dalits at least somewhat equal rights in society, the most important thing we need to do is to empower them. We need to empower the Dalits. We need to work towards the upliftment of Dalits. We need to understand the Dalits. And that is when we will somewhat reach towards a more progressive and inclusive society, which does not treat Dalits as slaves. Because that is what Dalits are treated as right now. And we really, really need to understand the severity of the problem of Dalits in the current scenario. And we need to move urgently, because this is an urgent problem. It has existed for far too long, for 3,000 years too long. And we have to work towards ending it. And we all have to make a collective effort towards ending this sort of systemic discrimination. Otherwise, if this kind of problem is kept on continuing, the Dalit oppression will keep on going on. Unless we make a collective effort to end this discrimination, there is not going to be a solution.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Hi,
Okay,
Sankul.
great.
Thank you for that. That was excellent, detailed.
Thank you, Hari. Thank you for having me, and thank you to all of you for watching it.
So we have a lot of questions from the
Yeah,
chat.
I read them.
We sent you some. Do you want to start with the first one?
Just a second, let me just read that. Are you referring to the one about the IIT?
I think I'll read it out to you. I'll read it out
Sure,
the
sure,
question. So Ayush
sure.
Garg asks you, on the point of reservation, I'd like to ask, wouldn't reservation based on poverty be more beneficial in financial cases such as IIT? Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So when it comes to discussing reservations, what we need to first of all realize is that reservation is a form to ending discrimination. It's not an economic upliftment scheme. In the very sort of principles of reservations is to guarantee representation to the marginalized sections of society. It is not about it's not a financial upliftment scheme. Of course, you have the financial reservations in the form of the economically weaker sections, but when it comes to the very essence of reservations, what we need to realize is that it is to guarantee the sort of education to the ones who have been oppressed because of their caste. A poor Brahmin back like 100 or 200 years ago was still granted education, whereas the Dalit back in those days was not granted reservation. So what we need to realize is that reservation is a way to granting representation of those who have not been granted representation in education and in jobs. Even if you look at, for example, the topic of wealth and caste, if you want to interrelate the two, there is a very direct connection between the two. For example, the Brahmins earn 48% more than the national average, the upper castes earn 45% more than the national average, whereas Dalits and Adivasis earn 21 and 37% less than the national average. So once again, you have to realize that even if you are to talk about you know the topic of reservations from the lens of wealth, once again, it is the Brahmins and the upper castes who will once again have the overwhelmingly, I would say, uh, they will overwhelmingly occupy the sort of positions of power when it comes to regarding the wealth.
Thank you for that. I think Ayush, that answers your question, I believe. I'm just going to go on to the next question.
Okay.
Lakshmi asks, I would hazard a guess that much of the younger Indian diaspora who've lived abroad their whole lives, they're not aware of the extent that casteism is so prevalent. Unless you seek out the information, I think you can live without realizing it completely. So what can this younger generation and non-residential Indians do when they come back to their country?
I think caste discrimination, first of all, does exist outside of India as well. Of course, the students or the younger generation might not realize this because the most of the people that they are surrounded with outside of India are mostly upper castes because they are the ones who have the sort of social mobility to move outside of the country. However, what we need to realize is if you look a little bit closer, in the NRI circles, you have these sort of groups as well, in the NRI circles, such as the Brahmin group or the Kshatriya group or the Iyengar group or these different caste groups that exist outside of India. Even recently, as I mentioned in the Cisco discrimination case, you could see how that one Dalit employee who managed to make it out of the country was discriminated even outside of the country by the upper caste people. So I think if younger generation wants to look at ending caste discrimination abroad, I think they should probably start off by looking around their own surroundings because the caste discrimination exists there as well. It's just that it is I think more discreetly kept than it is in India, but it definitely does exist. And just want to give a shout out to uh, Equality Labs, who are doing a fantastic job in the US of discussing about caste discrimination. So I think people should check them out, Equality Labs, on social media, and I think they will sort of get a basic idea of where to start, about addressing the caste discrimination abroad. I think that
I was
answers the question.
actually, thank you for that. I was having a discussion with Lakshmi on the chat, and I think that when you are from an upper caste,
Mhm.
you when you live abroad, you basically don't learn about it because you don't need to. If you are from
Yeah.
an upper caste, you will learn about it. You will feel it.
Yeah, there's often a
That-
saying that if you don't know what your caste is, you're most likely upper
Yeah,
caste.
exactly.
Yeah.
And through no fault of their own, but
Yeah,
that's
of course, but it does exist though.
so. The next question is from Justina. She asks, "Why is there no reservation in jobs like the defense forces and judiciary, even though they are permanent government jobs and and the army is most importantly in India was established by the British on the basis of caste. So has there been no affirmative action in these branches of government?" I don't think that's entirely accurate, right?
Actually, it is accurate. There is no there are caste groups in the army, but there is no reservation in the army.
Well, in the judiciary, at least in the Supreme Court, I think you mentioned that most of the judges are upper caste.
Yes.
So, okay, so there is no law like that,
No, there is not.
right?
No.
But it's still upper caste mostly
Yeah.
in the judiciary. I see.
No, the reason for that is because judiciary is basically, dominated by the upper caste men, the upper caste, because there is also a lack of women's representation. I think only around, I'm not exactly sure about the statistics here, but I think 16 of the 450 Supreme Court judges, I'm gonna have to check it out, but the representation of women as well in the Supreme Court is absolutely shocking and abysmal.
Yeah.
Similar, the same thing goes for the Dalits and the Adivasis. It's because every third judge in the High Court is a uncle of someone. So it's more of a passing of the job from one family member to the another, and that's how I think a
Mhm.
lot of jobs in India are sort of carried on, from one generation to another.
Thank you for that. Okay, so Sadhna asks, since casteism, among other forms of oppression, are so deeply rooted in our society, we often are not able to identify actions that are a direct function of casteism and oppression. For someone who's trying to break out of this flawed system, what kind of outlook should one have to identify oppression and discrimination, regardless of how discrete it may be?
I think the first step to doing that is to address the problem here. And the first problem would be to identify that caste exists, and it exists everywhere. Like, even if you're in a college, or if you're in a workplace, or even if you look at your family, friends, and all of that, the caste discrimination does exist there. And I think in order to sort of question, or sort of, break away from the caste discrimination, what is important is to sort of question the kind of casteism that exists in your own circles. A very simple form of like breaking away from the casteism would be to look at how you treat the people who work for you. If you look at your house helps or the
Yeah.
watchmen or the kind of people, yeah. So even there the casteism is actually prevalent. The sort of, I would say, the beneath the layer of the class, there is the caste that is present. It is because of the casteism that you make your Dalit maid sit on the floor, or that you don't treat her as an equal. So once again, I think if you want to talk about caste discrimination and addressing caste discrimination, I think it really should start in your sort of inner circles and in your personal life, and then you can move forward with the larger cause.
Okay. Sadhna, I hope he answered your question. Okay, Yashpreet asks, for those of us living outside India and wanting to contribute to the fight against Dalit oppression, what are some of your thoughts, advice for us on getting involved in activism work in India? As a student myself, I believe that research and academia work is one way of getting involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I think once again, as I said, if you want
Yeah.
to get involved with the, yeah, once again, if you want to get involved with the sort of anti-caste groups abroad, there are people like Equality Labs and many more anti-caste groups abroad as well in the UK. I think someone mentioned in the chat
Yeah.
box about getting in touch with them. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you can just point out that message. So there are these sort of anti-caste groups that do exist, and I think if you can get in touch with them, I think that's where you can sort of just start off your, anti-caste struggle. And of course, getting in academia is a very sort of, I would say, encourage. I would totally encourage that, because that way you can sort of point out the sort of caste discrimination that exists to the rest of the world, not just in India, but also in the, the particular country that they may be living in.
I just want to point out that the organization that's dealing with anti-caste discrimination in the UK is called ACDA, Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance. And if you want to get involved, just get in touch with them. All right, so I'm just going to go on to the next question.
Yeah.
Do you feel that the decline in democracy and the current government has added or has reduced this caste discrimination, and has decreased or increased the rate at which crimes against lower castes are convicted by the judiciary and the police? So
I
basically, I
think,
think the performance of the BJP
yeah.
government on the caste issue.
Yeah, I think there has definitely been, first of all, an increase in the caste crimes, and what has happened is that there has been a more brazen form of attack against the Dalits and the, religious minorities as well, such as the Muslims.
Yeah.
If you look at the Una incident, the Dalits were flogged in open daylight, and that is allowed because what the BJP has done is that it has given an open pass, it has given a free pass to the kind of, cow vigilantes or whatever you want to call them, to commit these crimes against the Dalits and the Muslims. The mindset of these people is not really to protect the cow. If BJP really cared about protecting the cow, India would not be the largest exporter of beef around the world. Their main agenda is to sort of oppress the Dalits and Muslims, and the cow protection or whatever is just an excuse to sort of, attack the minorities in the country.
Yeah, just to point that out, India is, I think, the third largest exporter of beef. at the
Third
moment.
largest. Okay,
I
okay,
think it's
fair
the
enough.
third largest. You might
Okay.
have to check that, but that is still a
Me
shocking.
too, me too.
All right, so I'll go to the next question. Hemant asks, economic development and upliftment of the Dalits is required in order to improve the segregation. Do you think positive discrimination in workplaces is required? I'm not sure what positive discrimination
I
entails.
think it means affirmative action.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think affirmative action, first of all, does not exist in most of the workspaces in India. I think if you just want to go into the statistics, the affirmative action in Indian jobs only exists in about 0.5% of all the occupations in India. If you want me to break that down further for you, first of all, I think about 92% of the Indian, job sector is first of all in the unorganized sector. Only 8% of the Indian workplace is actually in the organized sector. Even if you look at the organized sector, you have the private sector and the public sector, and most of the jobs these days are going towards the private sector. So once again, there is a shrink, a sort of a sort of I would say there is an attack on the private sector, the public sector in India, especially recently with Modi and his policies. He has sort of started the wave of privatization. Therefore, the public sector is now therefore getting more and more reduced. So once again, the sort of public sector and whatever is left of the public sector, which is only about 2 to 3% of the total jobs in India, and even in these jobs, only 50% of the jobs are actually reserved for the Dalits. So then once again, you have to look at the statistics, and only about 0.5% or 1% of the total jobs in India are actually reserved in the sort of jobs for the Dalits and Adivasis. The rest, 99.5%, most of the jobs, in fact, the Dalits do are the ones that are the caste occupations. The ones that are like uh, manual scavenging or sanitary workers and all of that. These are the jobs that have been carried on by generations of Dalits, one generation after the other, because they have been forced into this kind of occupation. So of course, I think positive discrimination in affirmative action in the job sector is very much a requirement for Dalits to sort of gain the economic upliftment.
Understood. I'm going to go to the last question from
Yeah.
the for now. Ankush asks, how would Mr. Sankul recommend OBCs who are somewhat financially comfortable to contribute to the anti-caste movement, and are they allowed to lead or speak about it? If yes, how do they ensure that they do not speak over SCs, STs, and DNTs, especially women and trans persons? This is a good question, I think.
Yeah, it is. So I think first of all, if you look at the sort of today's narrative, basically what has happened is that the BJP has consolidated all over the OBC base. I think just recently there was a video of an OBC man assaulting a Dalit child for drinking water from a temple. So I think what needs to happen with the OBCs is that they need to once again realize that the sort of thing that they are protecting was the very thing that they were being discriminated against back in the day. I think as Manevar Kashiram said that you need to sort of unify the 85% of the population, which of course includes the Dalit, Adivasis, and the OBCs. So I think if you want to talk about how OBCs should sort of lead the movement, I think they should first of all start off by correcting their own people and correcting their own brethren of the crimes that are being committed by them today, against
Yeah,
the Dalits and the Muslims today. I don't really think that OBCs should not be allowed to lead the movement. I think they should, in fact, come forward and lead it themselves. I think they are just as capable of being anti-caste as the Dalits and Adivasis, or any of the gender minorities as well.
I see. My question for that would be, because these are different groups with their own interests, and
Yeah,
they have to align themselves into one group. We've already seen the problems with the LGBTQ movement when all of them are in under one banner. Some of
yeah,
their requirements just get ignored. So how
right.
would that be addressed is probably something to. I mean,
Yeah,
I
absolutely. I
think
think even within the OBCs, you have very different kind of groups. You
yeah,
have the financially powerful ones, you have the economically powerful ones, you have the politically powerful ones. So I think what really needs to be addressed, if you want to unify them, is that you need to unify them under like one banner. Like what if you look at, as I said, the work that Kashiram did or the work that Mayavathi did, is that she unified all the people who were anti-caste or who were downtrodden of the people, even the OBCs and the Dalits and the Muslims. I think she, for the most part, really failed to win the support of the upper caste because of how she was treated by the media and everything.
yeah,
She managed to win the support of her people, of the downtrodden people. And in the word itself, it says Bhausen Samaj Party. So it is the party of the Bhaujans. It is the party of all the collective, I would say, backward castes. So once again, I think if you want to talk about the diversity in OBC groups, it definitely does exist, and I don't think you can combine all of them, under one banner. But I think we should definitely try to, sort of collect and gather as many as we can.
Understood. I'm just going to move on to this interesting question that I saw in the chat box. What can
Okay.
we, Akshita asks, what can we do to make safe spaces for Dalits in schools, colleges, and workplaces? Also, is there something that can be done when the casteism is coming from someone with a higher authority? For example, teachers and professors are casteist towards students. What can we do about this?
I think that's a good question. I think the most important thing would be to reach out to them first of all, though, because that is what does not happen in a lot of cases. You could help them in multiple ways. Of course, you can help them by just lending a ear, or by helping them sort of voice out their, frustration or their criticism, or in multiple ways. I would say even in the case of like Rohit Vemula, I think if he had been sort of supported by, let's say, some of the leftist groups, or if some of the, the ones who were in power at the time, the politicians who came, to sort of, to, gain some traction from his death, they were not the ones who, sort of supported him when he was being harassed by the university professors, or he was being harassed by the chancellor. So once again, I think when it comes to addressing the problem of casteism in schools and colleges, I think what's most important is to sort of form these anti-caste groups, which of course exist today as well. Like for example, in IIT you have these lack of representation in the form of reservations, but you have seen students come out, and you have seen students form these anti-caste groups, who come together and they sort of address this discrimination. And I think it's really comforting to see a lot of students from the same background or from the same discrimination come together and voice out their sort of frustration or critique of the system.
Okay. Do you personally know any groups that are targeted towards like these students? Like, let's say if you face a problem in school where some teachers being castist towards you, do you know where to go
Yeah, I
to?
think BAPSA is a really good organization. It's the
Okay.
Birsa Ambedkar Phule Students Union, and also I think in most of these colleges, at least in the public colleges, I could say that you have Ambedkar organizations, or backward caste organizations, which have been sort of been forming, especially after the sort of the case of Rohit Vemula. Even in IITs, you have them. I think you have them in DU as well. BAPSA is very much prevalent in JNU. In fact, I think in the recent JNU elections, they almost finished second. So there is this
Yeah.
Ambedkarite sort of movement that is on the rise now. And I think if you wanted to contribute to the anti-caste movement, I think these sort of organizations from a very young age would be a good way to go towards them.
Thank you, Sankul, for that. Can you put the name of the organization in the chat box? So
Yeah,
someone
sure,
needs
sure.
to.
I'll just figure that out.
Okay, I think Akshita was the one who asked that. Anyway, I think the last question that I want to ask you from the chat box is from
Okay.
Arshia. My
Okay.
forefathers were impoverished Dalits who converted to Christianity, and over 3 generations reached a point where caste bias no longer affected our day-to-day lives. I come under the general category now. With my caste identity so diluted, can I still be an ally? To what extent?
I think everyone can be an ally, and the anti-caste movement needs as many allies as it can get. Because one of the most main problems of the anti-caste movement is that it does not get enough support from the upper caste people, because they are so sort of oblivious to the problem of caste, or they are sort of you know busy in discriminating against the Dalits, that there is no sort of support from the ones who have the resources and the power. I think, as I think as the person said, the original person said, that she is now quite privileged to be considered as a general category. I think she can, of course, not only be a ally, but she can also use the resources to sort of uplift the movement, and contribute towards the anti-caste struggle that we are all together in here.
Okay, Ashi, I hope that answers your question. I think we have a few minutes. If someone wants to do a meet and greet with Sankul, you can just put your name in the chat, and
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll unmute you. Um, is there someone who wants to meet Sankul? I think everyone's shy.
uh,
Sankul, do let them know what your Twitter handle is. And
Oh yeah, my Twitter handle is @Sankul333. I think we'll find it. It's I
yeah,
think it's the first one that pops up when you search for my name.
yeah.
Feel free to reach out to me. And once again, thank you all for coming here. It really means a lot. And thank you to Hari as well for this interesting talk.
Yeah, that's fine. All right, everyone, I think we have one more event. I'm just going to give you some information. Just a second. Yep, the festival wraps up on the 1st of April, and we'll have fringe events throughout the year. We'll post event links for the first soon. I think if you go on the Oxford Human Rights Eventbrite page, you'll see the link for the last event. It'll be a film screening based on the life of a Palestinian mayor of Ramallah, and we hope you will join our mailing list so we can keep in touch with you for our upcoming events. Thank you to our tech team tonight, Anushree and Aparna, and thank you to Alvina Laskar, the festival planning committee, and everyone at Sendep and Brooks who helped us to organize this event. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.